Welcome to the Quantum Healing Oracle. This is a channel dedicated to using astrology and tarot to take a look at the collective energies and bring forward guidance and clarity and ultimately help you live your most authentic and empowered life. My name's Pan. If you're new here, please feel free to like and subscribe. And today we're going to do a deep dive into the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. This is actually going to be a three-part series. So in this first video, I'm going to go into kind of what I've been learning about Saturn and Neptune. This conjunction's been occurring. They've been very close for the last year about now. So I'm going to take a deep dive and really unpack some of the things I've been learning and understanding about this connection. In the second video, we're going to take a deeper look at the astrology. And then in the third video, we'll do a tarot reading and see how the energies reflect through that. So again, please only take what resonates. These are my interpretations of the energies. Nothing's ever set in stone. There's always multiple paths for you to take, and ultimately it's up to you to choose the perspectives, the ideas, and the paths that work best for you. So to begin with explaining how I've come to understand this conjunction, I'm going to take a step back and explain what I've learned a little bit about quantum consciousness. Now, I've shared a little bit about this in one of my recent videos, and so if you've heard this before, just bear with me. I'm going to do a bit of a recap, but essentially what quantum physicists have been discovering is that when they look at particles that are very small, they see that they don't function in a very predictable and determined way. What they're seeing is that particles either are in what they're calling the wave form, where they can be potentially in multiple places all at once, and then they collapse into a particle form, where then they appear to be fixed in one particular place. And so what quantum physics is really showing is that there's a potential field in which things exist before they actually collapse and become the solid fixed thing that we experience. And so what I've learned in my own journey is that consciousness functions very much the same way, that we exist as a field of potential, a field of possibility, and then depending on those circumstances and those energies, when they culminate, we collapse each moment into one very specific potential, and we experience that one at a time. And so the key to understanding how we're navigating this quantum field, so to speak, of our lives is that as we're moving forward in our future, it's not a fixed series of events that are happening. And this brings into the question about timelines, and also this question about, are we splitting into two Earths, or are we splitting into multiple Earths, where some people are going in a positive path into a new Earth, and then some people are going into a negative path on a negative Earth. And so that's what I want to unpack in this video. I just want to talk a little bit about kind of what's being said, and also bring my perspectives to try to demystify and kind of make sense as to how to understand this dynamic in a really grounded and practical way. So I think it was coined as early as Dolores Cannon back in the 80s. She was a hypnotherapist that were regressing people into the out-of-body state. And they were reporting, when they looked forward into the future at this time, that there were two Earths, that the Earth was splitting, and that there was going to be different expressions of the Earth, and that we would have to choose which one that we would align with. And so I think that's kind of where that conversation got started. And then, of course, as people have been expanding their spiritual understanding, and we've had information access online, people have been sharing about their experiences of timelines and how we're jumping and shifting in timelines. And this is what can be called as quantum shifting, when you understand that you're existing in a field of potential and you can shift into a specific set of experiences or a specific set of frequencies. And that's kind of what we're learning to understand when we start to ask ourselves the question, is that if we are of a quantum consciousness, our being operates with quantum consciousness, what is the potential to utilize that? What is available and helps us to feel empowered and connected to the nature of our life when we have this information that's available? So we'll first start and talk about the planets and kind of how I've come to understand the difference between what the outer planets represent versus what the inner planets represent. The inner planets represent more of our personal experience. We have Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the Moon, and those are kind of aspects of our human consciousness that we experience individually. Kind of Venus, I relate a lot with our values, how we give and receive love based on our values, and that's a very unique experience. Each person has a different set of values, and they give and receive love in different ways. And same with Mars. Motivation and actions. People take their motivations and actions depending on their unique personality. But when we start moving into the outer planets, what we start to see is that these are structures of the consciousness of the entire collective of humanity. And so specifically, we're going to talk about what Saturn and Neptune represent through that lens of how do these outer planets represent these aspects of our collective experience. But before we talk about Saturn and Neptune specifically, I'm just going to hit on the fact that when we experience two outer planets coming into conjunction, this is a major shift in the way our collective consciousness operates. And a good way of kind of explaining, or at least a reference of what happens when these planets come conjunct, is when we look at the Pluto and Saturn conjunction back in 2020. And Pluto being the planet of transformation and Saturn being the planet of structures, when they were conjunct, we experienced a lot of changes in our world. And that was not just changes in our world through COVID and everything it brought up for each of us, but it was literally changes in the structure of our consciousness that gave us new opportunities of how to perceive life and how to move forward. And I think if we all check in as to what we went through during that time, we can see for ourselves kind of what that meant for each of us. So that's why this conjunction between Saturn and Neptune is such a big deal, because again, we have two outer planets that are coming conjunct, and so we're seeing a shift in our collective functioning. Our human collective consciousness is beginning to operate in a new way. And because these planets have been traveling so closely together for, again, about the last year, I've spent a lot of time kind of in meditation connecting with what that has been meaning for me, and then how I can best communicate that understanding to others. So what I've come to understand about Saturn, and in classical astrology, they talk about Saturn is what makes things real, and talks about the kind of grounded physical aspects of reality that can create limitations and constriction. And what I've found intuitively when connecting with Saturn is what makes our reality real is our experience of it. And so Saturn governs and shows us what makes up our experience of reality, what actually makes it real. And so I've found there's 9 different attributes that contribute to what makes our reality real. 1 is our perceptions, 2 is our choices, 3 is our actions, 4 is how we experience, how we reflect on our experiences, how we learn, how we grow, how we transcend, and how we forget or limit ourselves again. And so I'm going to focus on 3 of those when I am talking about this conjunction that I feel like really highlight the essence of what Saturn represents, is that our perception, our choices, and our actions. These are all experiences within the human consciousness. We all have perceptions. We all make choices. We all take action. That's something that everyone does. And Saturn represents, that's actually the fundamental part of what we experience when we make a choice. We're actually connecting with Saturn's energy. And so what Saturn has shown me that's important to understand about this is how each one of these perceptions, choices, and actions, they have a frequency. And depending on the frequency, it's going to create a resonance, or it's going to create a way we relate with the harmony of that frequency. And so I'm sure you've probably heard everything comes down to a choice between love and fear. This is kind of a way of showing the scale of what frequency is as an experience. When we operate in a very high frequency, we're operating on the spectrum of experiencing love. When we operate on a lower frequency, we're experiencing fear. And so that's kind of how we can gauge. Of course, there's every gradient, in between those two ends of the spectrum, but that's how we can kind of gauge for ourselves when we are having certain perspectives and certain points of view. The ones that align with more love are of a higher frequency. The ones that are more aligned with fear are of lower frequency. And another way of understanding this is that the higher frequencies are more inclusive. They include everybody's different perspective or differences in people and differences in situation. There's no opposition to things being different when you are of a higher frequency. You can see that everything actually fits and works together. Whereas if you're vibrating at a lower frequency, the differences seem oppositional. They seem like they're good and bad, or somebody or something is against you and prohibiting you from being able to do or be what you want. And so this is kind of why it's important to understand that when it comes to our perceptions, we can choose the frequency of each perception that we have. And this is happening subconsciously and consciously all the time. Every time we have a circumstance in our life, we can choose to see that through the lens of integrative energy, where everything works together and feel connected in love, or we can see it through the lens of separated energy, where things are opposing each other, and that's the lens of fear. So we have our perception, we have our choices. We realize every time that we have the opportunity to make a choice, we can choose a higher frequency or a lower frequency, and we take action. And every action has its own frequency as well. And so when we understand that every moment, whether we're aware of it or not, we're choosing those frequencies, that's our navigation. That's our guidance system. That's how, if we want to resonate and move into a higher frequency range, we find new perceptions and choices and actions that align with higher frequencies, and we practice doing that. That's a lot of what the Abraham Hicks channeled information, I feel like, is about. It's showing how no matter what circumstance you're looking at, you can always find a way of vibrating at a higher frequency about that. And then catch yourself when you're vibrating at a lower frequency and know that there is another option. Okay, so this is kind of the way our consciousness makes our reality real through vibration and resonance, and it's ultimately us choosing it. And this is why Saturn's been known to be like a disciplinarian. It's been known to be one who teaches us lessons, because it's Saturn's job to kind of show us that we are choosing that, and we can take responsibility for the vibrations that we're choosing, and we have control over the vibrations that we choose. And so in a sense, we're choosing to construct the reality that we experience based out of frequency if we have that awareness. Okay, so that's kind of the Saturn piece. Now, the Neptune piece, Neptune represents the quantum field itself. It represents all the possibilities. It represents all the different things that can happen. Like when you go into your imagination and you imagine all the different things you could do at this moment, those are an absolute reality in an alternate parallel reality, but Neptune is the one that holds all of those potential realities. That's why we can imagine what we can imagine, because Neptune is actually the part of our consciousness that shows us that all those realities are just different parallel realities. And that's the quantum expression, or the wave function of all the realities existing as once, but then we choose and we collapse the one that becomes real. And so Neptune's been known in classical astrology as being about illusion and fantasy, and that's why, because it actually is the part of the consciousness that holds all the potentials that can be collapsed. So what about this question of, are we splitting into two different Earths? Well, the simple answer is yes, but not in the way that most people think. The way most people talk about the two Earths occurring is that you have 8 billion people on this planet, and the ones that can resonate with the new Earth, they all jump onto this one planet, and all the ones that aren't resonating with the new Earth, they just go to this other one. And so it would seem to the ones that are going to the new Earth that everybody else is being left behind. And that's where this is more nuanced than that, because the truth is there's not just two Earths that are possible. There's an infinite. There's a multitude of different Earths that are possible. Not only possible, but probable. And it's not that this is new, that this is just happening. It's always been this way. It's always been that we have access to all of these different potential versions of Earth that we could align with, depending on the resonance of our own frequency. Okay, so this idea isn't that now these Earths are splitting. They've actually always been splitting. What's new now, what's actually happening now, is it has to do with cycles. It has to do with large cycles, where collectively we go through these agreements to experience a certain trend of exploration or a certain set of lessons collectively as we move through a cycle. It's like taking the school year and choosing to move through first grade. And then the next school year, you may choose to move through second grade. So there is truth to the fact that when we reach the end of these cycles, it becomes a stronger choice to look at the fact that, did you learn all the lessons you needed to learn in first grade? Are you ready to then, when the next cycle begins, begin a new cycle in second grade? Or do you need to start the new cycle and repeat first grade again? And that's what people are perceiving as being this choice between these two Earths, is that we are completing a very large cycle, and the collective has had the opportunity to learn everything it's needed to learn to step into a new grade or a new expression of learning on the planet. And that's what people are calling this new Earth, is that we no longer need the Earth to run and look the way that it's looked, because the lessons are going to be different in the next grade. And so that's what is actually happening when we talk about transitioning into a new Earth. It's just another grade where there's another set of lessons, and the whole circumstance on Earth needs to be different in order to hold space for what those new lessons are. And so I do believe there is truth to the fact that those that have come complete with the learning of this density level on Earth are choosing to shift and begin a new set of lessons in a new vibratory frequency range that we're calling New Earth. And there will be those that will choose to stay and repeat the lessons of this frequency range. And it's not a judgmental thing, and it's not that anyone has failed and anyone's succeeding. This is just a matter of frequency, resonance, and alignment. And I can almost feel in myself that my passion and my devotion to learning the lessons of this frequency range and shifting into the next one might be so strong because I've repeated this density level in other incarnations, that I know what it's like to have not learned everything in the first time around with a cycle. Or sometimes we need to have those experiences of repetition that then build up more information and understanding how to make different choices in the future. And the one thing about the quantum field, if you're always looking at all the potentials and all the possibilities, we're always going to see all the different possibilities play out, which means you can make your choice whether you want to raise your frequency and move to the new Earth, but you're going to see everyone else making a slightly different choice. There'll be a lot that will be going in the same direction, and there'll be a lot that won't be going in the same direction. But that's just because that's the quantum field of all the different parallel opportunities that you've had access to yourself. And so it's not that we're losing anything because others are choosing a path that we aren't choosing, because consciousness will always diversify and split and have to cover all the different ways of being. And that's what we're seeing. And so more realistically, I feel like what's going to happen for those of us that are shifting in the higher frequency range, we begin to operate in that new bandwidth. And we're just going to begin to see more and more people that are also operating in that bandwidth. We're going to see that reflected back to us because that was the choice that we made. And life is always about what you put out is what you get back. So the frequency you put out is what you'll receive. And so I think what we're seeing at this time is that energy, because we're coming to a cycle point, is getting stronger and showing us with a stronger feeling those that are resonating with this higher frequency versus those that may not be resonating with the higher frequency. And who knows, we may see in our reality as we move into a higher frequency range, we may have versions of the people that actually went in the other frequency range, but we still may see reflections of them in our frequency range shifting into that higher frequency. Whereas there could be beings choosing and shifting into lower frequency that could still be creating reflections of those that went into the higher frequency in their lower frequency range. And that's why it's not as simple as to say that anyone's being left behind, because the quantum expression is that you're only going to reflect back the frequency that you're in resonance with, and everyone's always going to come with you. It's never going to seem like anybody's left behind, because the totality of who you are as a quantum being will continue to show up in your new reality. Just as though the totality of the others who may resonate at a lower frequency, they'll have the entirety of their being show up in that one too. And so it's not just a matter of splitting out for the sake of some people are succeeding and others aren't. I don't feel like that's the absolute truth. I just feel everyone's on their own evolutionary journey, and we never really know what anyone else's journey is about. Because ultimately, you could spend lifetimes in a lower frequency range to learn exactly what you needed to learn to totally master a skill and be of service in a specific way in future incarnations. Nothing's ever lost. Everything of the negative experience is always recycled and put into service in a higher way that we don't fully understand. So I think it's important to have compassion for no matter what it looks like, anybody's choices or anybody else's frequency. It's okay to hold equanimity and neutrality of understanding that all frequencies, all choices, and all paths are a part of what it means to be a quantum expression of creation. And we can honor each person's individual journey, knowing that they'll get exactly what they need out of their journey. And ultimately, it's none of our business, because the only thing you have responsibility for is the choices that you make and the frequency and resonance you choose, and then just experiencing and devoting yourself 100% to whatever that is. So I think that's, to me, the most compassionate way of understanding that we are seeing the expression of frequencies moving in different directions, but not because of any kind of punishment or reward. It's just we're watching the awareness of quantum consciousness become available so we can understand this is actually the way it's always been. We just didn't see it that way. And so another thing I want to talk a little bit about is timelines. And so when people talk about jumping timelines, you know, what they're really talking about is how if you understood, if you woke up this morning, that you would have a certain set of potentials available to you. You can almost sense the potentials that are available, especially the ones that are closer to you, because you can feel like, oh, I could wake up, I could go get breakfast, I could have breakfast at home, I could go visit a friend, I could go for a walk. Like all those potentials kind of show up in the field whenever we begin to approach the opportunity. And then we make choices based on the potentials that we feel most aligned with. That's why our intuitive response and the connection to our own frequency is so important, because if we follow what feels like the most inspiring thing to do, the most exciting thing to do, we know we're shifting into the highest frequency potential that's available. And so we don't need to intellectually figure out, should I go out for breakfast or should I eat at home? You can just genuinely feel drawn. This is what feels like the right thing, and I feel excited about it, and off you go. That's the potential that you collapse. So what happens, we're always shifting through different parallel realities. We're always shifting through different timelines, but sometimes there's different sets of potential that get stronger when you make certain choices. It's like saying, if you didn't know how to ride a bike, you may still have the potential of riding a bike in your field, but it wouldn't be very strong because you've never got a bike, you never rode the bike, you don't know how to ride a bike. But as soon as you buy that bike and you start to learn to ride that bike, all of a sudden you open a whole set of potentials available to you about riding a bike that weren't available before you bought the bike. And so that's really what I see timeline shifting as, is realizing that there are key points, like pressure points, where certain choices carry a stronger charge because those choices open up whole new sets of potential that weren't available before. But ultimately, this is something that does require our participation, because as much as we can be in that quantum field and we can say, oh, I feel like I just shifted timelines, and yes, that can be true. What Saturn's job is to show you is that it needs to be made real. If you just stay in Neptune's idea of all these different parallel realities and you think you're shifting timelines and moving in a higher trajectory, but you're not actually taking action to make it real, that's where the idea of seeing Neptune is connected to fantasy and delusion, because it's an ungrounded way of using the quantum field and then creating a story out of the fact that you're moving forward when you're not actually taking any action in your life to open new potentials. Okay, so this brings me to why I feel like this time is so powerful. This is probably the strongest astrological energy of the year, and I feel that it's so powerful because it carries within it the conception of this understanding. That when we begin to understand that we can choose whatever it is that we wish to choose, we can tap into the potential of everything that's available. But if we don't take action and shift into a frequency to make it real and collapse that set of potentials into our reality, they're just going to sit as fantasy-like potentials. And I think at this time, it's just important, I call it where the rubber meets the road, is that we can become amazing spiritual beings and sit in meditation and understand the workings of the universe, but unless we take action on it and ground it into our reality through our choices, our perceptions, and our actions, we're not going to actually experience the full reality shift out of it. And so this is where it's connecting to the idea of personal responsibility. And the theme I've been given for what to call this transit is that responsibility is leadership in the new world. Responsibility is leadership in the new world. And I'm going to unpack that a little more in the next video that I do. But essentially what this is talking about is the ability to respond, responsibility, with the perceptions, the choices, and the actions that you can take when you have the opportunity to make that real and shift into a higher frequency of love and unity and inclusivity. That responsible action, that ability to respond to that opportunity, is how you initiate and begin to open those potentials for yourself and start to move into that reality. And just by the nature of doing that, it's setting an example for others to learn how to do it as well. And again, I'm going to cover more about this reflection about what we've known leadership to be and how that concept is changing as we move forward. But this is essentially the idea that I wanted to share about this energy. And again, this is something I've been working with in just developing the understanding, how it's working in my own life, putting it into practice in my own life, and just making the association that when I feel the opportunity to make certain choices and make certain changes, that I can actually feel those new potentials opening up, and I can know that I'm moving my life in that direction. And to me, I found it to be very empowering. It's very empowering because I feel how I'm in control of shifting the potential field, and that it increases whatever it is that I wish to experience. I'm increasing, accessing, increasing, and eventually embodying the potential of what I can imagine myself to be. This is kind of the truth underneath the surface of what manifestation, law of attraction stuff is actually all about. But it's that when you're in the process of making the new set of potentials real, you know it. And it just starts to change. Instead of this kind of like wishful thinking idea of creating the reality you want, you begin to actually experience yourself shifting into it little by little. Because this isn't necessarily something that just happens all at once, although it can. I found that Saturn likes to break things down into smaller pieces and show you how to take small steps and always be moving forward. And even if it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, it's always a feeling of moving forward and knowing what you're moving forward into. And that's where the true essence of discipline lives, in my opinion. Is discipline was never supposed to be people coming in and telling you, you've done something wrong, I'm going to punish you, don't do that again. Discipline is the internal process of knowing what it is you're becoming and then watching yourself shift into that becoming with your ability to be in healthy control of that. Okay. And there is always a component of surrender. There's always a component of the divine timing. You know, this isn't about forcing these things to happen because we're bent on experiencing a specific reality. There is a whole counterbalance. We've all heard of a lot of the other spiritual practices of going with the flow, understanding when there's a genuine opening for something and when there's not, divine timing. All of that definitely plays a role. But for me, it's really become a strong focus on the mechanics of really getting clear about the potentials that I want to open in my own life, and then feel when life gives me the opportunity to take action and shift into those frequency ranges in an intentional way. And then just to let myself know, look at that, you know, I'm doing it. So I'm here to try to offer that reflection back to any of you that feel like you resonate with this idea, that this isn't about getting anywhere. This isn't about getting to the vision of seeing yourself be who you want to be. It's never the destination. It's always the journey. That the journey is meant to feel empowering because you can feel yourself gaining more understanding and having a healthier control over your frequency and your way you interact with life. And it's also meant to feel more authentic because you realize you have the opportunity to choose the things that feel most like you. You choose the things that resonate with who you want to be. You can choose to be who you prefer to be. You can choose to shift into a version of Earth that you prefer to be in. And it takes away any of the projection and judgment that we had in the old paradigm where we were pointing the finger and saying, I can't be who I want to be in the world because these people over here won't let me, or this circumstance, the economy or the government or whatever, because they're that way, I can't experience the world that I prefer. All of that is being illuminated as being an illusion, and it's being illuminated as being disempowering and not the truth of how reality works. That's just been a misunderstanding that we're actually have more control over becoming who we prefer to be and living in a world that we prefer to be than we've known before. But again, they talk about 2026 being the year of revelation, the year of disclosure, the year of things coming to light that we didn't know. I would include this big time in what this is about. It's not focusing on the Epstein files or the corruption in the secret government. Honestly, I could care less about that because this is where makes me feel connected to my own life, and it makes me feel connected to the changes I can make. And that's what I feel is the most beneficial part of understanding this for myself and then sharing it with others, because again, I feel like this is a collective awakening. We're all being given the opportunity to understand these things in our own way, and then the more people that begin to act in that empowered and authentic way begins to strengthen the collective field where we're leading by example what it is to shift frequency and shift into that new world, and not waiting for it as some inevitable someday. It's every single day. It's every moment in whatever way that we can, knowing that that's the ability that we have because that's how creation works, and then being able to share it with others. So that's my initial deep dive into the energies of Saturn Neptune. And again, the next video is going to be showing a little bit more about the astrology itself and also talking more about this idea of leadership and responsibility. So again, thank you for being here. Please like and subscribe. If anyone would like a personal reading, you can find my email in the description box. And we'll see you next time.